pregnant wife found out her millionaire husband was cheating. She took the house and the baby. There are certain stories that twist the heart and keep you holding your breath, and this is one of them. It starts with a gilded mansion in a peaceful Connecticut suburb where gentle autumn leaves once carried the promise of love and prosperity. But behind high walls and hushed corridors, betrayal brewed. Stella Fitzgerald, radiant and pregnant with her first child, believed she had found her happily ever after with her millionaire husband, Marcus Fitzgerald. Yet on the day she discovered his hidden betrayal, that dream was shattered. This is the saga of heartbreak, revenge, and redemption, a tale that will show you how far one woman will go to protect what's hers. The Fitzgerald estate sat perched on a rolling green hillside overlooking the quiet town of Laurelford in Connecticut. The lawns were manicured, hedges sculpted, the wide gravel driveway kept meticulously raked so that it looked like a white carpet leading to the imposing front doors. For years, neighbors and townspeople speculated about the family's glamorous lifestyle. Some whispered that Marcus Fitzgerald, the estate's master, had inherited an old family fortune. Others claimed he was a financial genius who struck gold on Wall Street. Perhaps both were true. Inside the mansion, Stella Fitzgerald paced the master bedroom, her eyes flitting between the clock on the wall and her phone. She was 8 months pregnant, her slender frame just beginning to feel the strain of carrying a child so close to term. Her long, dark hair was tied back from a gentle face that radiated warmth and hope. This baby was her dream, and it symbolized a new chapter in her life, one where she would finally have a loving family of her own. She and Marcus had been married for 3 years. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance. They met at a charity gala in Boston, introduced by a mutual acquaintance, Rachel Addison. Rachel was a PR consultant who made a name for herself in philanthropic circles, connecting wealthy donors to worthy causes. She had pulled Stella aside at the event, murmuring with excitement in her eyes, "Marcus Fitzgerald wants to meet you. Don't act surprised, but I hear he's smitten." Back then, Stella was swept off her feet by Marcus's confidence and the sincerity he exuded. He was older by about 10 years, and so sure of everything he said or did. One conversation led to a dance, then a proposal 6 months later. Friends said she was lucky. After all, how many people get to marry a handsome, charming millionaire whose wealth seemed endless? Stella believed them, believed her own love story might be straight out of a fairy tale. But in the past few months, Marcus grew distant. He worked later hours, traveled on weekends, and sometimes disappeared at odd moments with vague excuses. He still managed lavish gestures, a diamond necklace here, a first-class trip to Paris there, but Stella felt a niggling sense of something amiss. She tried to push back the suspicion, chalking it up to her own anxieties from pregnancy. However, her intuition told her there was more to his absences than business meetings. Tonight, Marcus was supposed to come home early to attend their Bubby-Moon dinner, a concept Stella had cherished, a small, celebratory meal for just the two of them before they welcomed their child into the world. The table was set. The chef, hired for the evening, had meticulously prepared an exquisite 3-course meal. Candles stood waiting to be lit, yet Marcus was an hour late, not answering calls or texts. Inside her heart, Stella felt that old pang of dread. She decided to call Rachel Addison, the only friend who had remained consistently in her life. Rachel picked up on the second ring, her voice subdued. "Stella," Rachel said, "is everything okay?" "I don't know," Stella sighed. "Marcus is late again. I just have a bad feeling about all of this." Rachel hesitated, then offered, "Do you want me to come over? We can wait for him together." Stella appreciated the offer, but she also felt a quiet shame in letting her friend witness how alone she was. "No," she said softly, "I'm fine. I just wanted someone to talk to." Stella hung up, steeling herself. She couldn't help but wonder if the rumors were true that Marcus was cheating. She shook her head, telling herself not to jump to conclusions. People talked, especially about the wealthy, but she remembered how, at certain parties, she had seen the glances between her husband and other women, or how he had once come home from a business trip with lipstick on his collar, which he had brushed off as an accidental smear from a colleague's friendly hug. Nevertheless, Stella held on to hope. He might walk in any moment, apologizing with that disarming smile. He might say he was stuck in a dreadful meeting or had to close a last-minute deal. This was her baby's father, after all, and she didn't want to believe the worst. But an hour turned into 2, and by midnight Stella was left cold and alone at a candle-lit table, tears slipping from her eyes as the candle wax pooled into a shimmering mess. It was nearly 1 in the morning when the door's lock finally clicked. Stella hurried to the foyer. Marcus entered, not with an apologetic expression, but with an air of annoyance, as though he resented being questioned. His tie was undone, and the faint smell of perfume clung to him, an unfamiliar, too sweet fragrance. "You're still up?" he asked. His voice clipped. "I texted to say I'd be late." Stella's eyes widened in hurt. "Marcus, I never got any text." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through, then shrugged. Maybe it didn't send. He didn't offer an explanation and instead walked right past her. Stella followed him into the living room, anger bubbling to the surface. "Where were you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Out," he replied shortly, loosening his shirt cuffs. "Out where?" "Meetings, Stella. My work doesn't stop just because we set up a fancy dinner." That single sentence, delivered with such coldness, shattered something inside her. This was not the man she had married, and yet she still needed answers, reassurance, anything to dispel her growing terror. "You smell like someone's perfume," she said more softly, tears threatening to spill over. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Marcus rolled his eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake. I was with a colleague's team. People hug. There's lots of close quarters. Please don't blow this out of proportion." "Out of proportion," Stella echoed. "Marcus, I'm 8 months pregnant, waiting here all night while that's enough." He snapped, shooting her a glare. "I'm tired. We'll talk in the morning." And with that, he turned away and left her standing in the living room, heart pounding, eyes brimming with tears. She heard him climb the stairs, his footsteps echoing in that lonely mansion. It had never felt more like a prison than in that moment. Stella walked to the window that overlooked the dark lawns. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the baby kick. Protectively, she placed a hand on her abdomen. She was not just one woman alone, she was carrying precious life, and that thought gave her a fleeting sense of strength. If Marcus was lying, if he was being unfaithful, she would protect herself and her child, no matter the cost. From that night onward, Stella sensed a cold distance from Marcus that she couldn't ignore. Gone were the days of lavish, spontaneous romance. He no longer kissed her forehead before he left for work or asked about the nursery preparations. He was always checking his phone, always in a hurry to be somewhere. When they spoke, his tone was clipped, as though she were a burden. Stella felt cornered. If she confronted him about an affair without evidence, he would just continue to deny it. And so the seeds of suspicion grew in her mind. She resolved that she would find out the truth on her own. Stella had always disliked the idea of snooping. In her upbringing, trust was a sacred thing. But trust, she realized, was a two-way street. If Marcus was breaking his vows, then the only way to confirm her suspicions was to gather proof. It was a difficult decision, one that twisted her stomach into knots, but she felt she owed it to herself and her unborn child to know the truth. Her first step was to call her friend Rachel Addison once more, this time in the privacy of the sunroom, where the house staff rarely lingered. She asked if Rachel could recommend a private investigator. The line fell silent for a moment before Rachel finally spoke. "Stella, are you sure you want to do this?" Rachel asked. "This could open a lot of wounds." "I'm certain," Stella replied. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. "I have to know. The not knowing is destroying me." Rachel gave her the number for a private investigator named Thomas Glendale, a man reputed for his discretion. 2 days later, Stella drove into the city and met Thomas at a discreet cafe. He was a calm, methodical man in his early 50s with a salt and pepper beard and dark, thoughtful eyes. Thomas listened patiently as she explained her fears. She tried to remain composed, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. He handed her a clean handkerchief, which she accepted gratefully. "Miss S. Fitzgerald," he said gently, "I'll do my job as quietly and thoroughly as possible. If your husband is cheating, I'll find out. But if he's not, well, at least you'll have peace of mind." Stella nodded. "I just need to know the truth, for my child's sake and for my own." Thomas agreed to begin his investigation immediately. The deal was sealed, and Stella left the cafe feeling a maelstrom of emotions: fear, guilt, desperation, and a faint spark of determination. If she was about to blow her marriage open, she was going to do it with her eyes wide open. In the subsequent weeks, life continued as usual on the surface. Stella went to her prenatal appointments, supervised the finishing touches on the baby's nursery, and tried to appear serene at the charity functions Marcus dragged her to. Meanwhile, Marcus's behavior remained aloof, even brusque. The tension in the house was palpable, but neither of them openly confronted the other. A pivotal moment came when Thomas Glendale called Stella one rainy afternoon. Stella slipped into the library to answer the phone, heart pounding. She picked up on the second ring. "Miss S. Fitzgerald, I have some news," Thomas said carefully. Stella braced herself. "Yes? You were right to suspect," he said gravely. "I followed your husband on 2 separate occasions this week. He met a woman, a Miss Natalie Hartford, at a luxury condo on the east side of Hartford City. The same condo both times. I have photographs and time logs if you'd like to see them." Stella's face went cold. She felt her pulse in her ears, a roaring heartbreak that drowned out coherent thought. She managed to choke out a question. Did he stay overnight with her?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. And the photos are quite, well, conclusive." Stella's world tilted. She clutched the edge of the mahogany desk to steady herself. Before she hung up, she forced herself to sound composed. "Thank you, Mr. Glendale. Please email me the details, and we'll decide on the next step." When Stella received the photos later that evening, they almost felt like a brutal confirmation of what she already knew in her heart. There, in grainy but unmistakable images, was her husband, his arm around a tall, elegant blonde woman who looked at him with undisguised warmth. The timestamps confirmed that these rendezvous weren't just dinners or casual meetings. Marcus spent entire nights in that penthouse with Miss Hartford. Tears streamed down Stella's cheeks as she studied each picture, her heartbreak mingling with a deepening anger. She was pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and here he was, flaunting his affair. The man who had once knelt on a beach to propose under the moonlight was now sneaking around with another woman while his wife was at home waiting. Anger took over, fueling her in a way she had never experienced. She realized she had to act, and act quickly. Her next call, after composing herself, was to an old family friend who was a lawyer, Victoria Ramirez. Victoria's father, Juan Ramirez, had once worked with Stella's father in a small business in Boston, and the families had remained connected through the years. Stella remembered Victoria as a tough, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in family law. If anyone could help her navigate the looming storm, it was Victoria. When Stella explained the situation, Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Stella, I'm so sorry. I knew something was off from the way you talked about Marcus lately. Listen, this is going to be hard, but we can handle it strategically. Connecticut's laws can work in your favor, especially with the child and the financial assets." Stella tried to steady her breathing, stroking her pregnant belly. She couldn't believe she was discussing the possibility of divorce with a lawyer. Just a year ago, she was happily planning how to transform one of the mansion's rooms into a nursery with a lovely Winnie the Pooh theme. Now, she was talking asset distribution and child custody. Victoria explained that, in the state of Connecticut, evidence of adultery could factor into the settlement, though it was not the sole determinant. She advised Stella to gather everything: financial documents, evidence of joint assets, any prenuptial agreements. Stella recalled that they had signed a prenuptial agreement before the wedding at Marcus's insistence. Though he was wealthy, she hadn't objected at the time, believing it to be a formality. She had to find that document and review it carefully. When Stella ended the call, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The heartbreak was still there, but now it was laced with resolve. She had to protect herself and her unborn child from a man who clearly had no qualms about betraying her, and something told her that there might be more secrets waiting to be discovered. That same evening, while Marcus was once again out on business, Stella tiptoed into his home office. It was a large, imposing room with dark wood shelves lined with first editions and polished awards. She booted up his desktop computer, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching. Then she began to search. She found bank statements, investment records, property titles. As she scrolled through them, it became clear that Marcus controlled a staggering number of assets, more than she ever suspected. Stocks, real estate, offshore accounts. Then she stumbled upon the prenuptial agreement. It was a scanned copy, with her signature and his, dated just weeks before their wedding. Skimming through it, Stella's eyes caught on certain lines that made her heart pound. The agreement heavily favored Marcus, awarding minimal spousal support if Stella sought a divorce within 5 years of the marriage. They were currently only in their 3rd year of marriage. The prenuptial arrangement also tied many of Marcus's assets to a trust, which might be inaccessible in a straightforward divorce. However, there was a critical clause regarding children. If Stella and Marcus had a child, the agreement offered a significantly larger spousal settlement in the event of separation, as well as ownership of any marital home they occupied together. The intention, presumably, was to ensure that any child of Marcus Fitzgerald would be well provided for. At first, relief flickered in Stella's chest. Perhaps she wasn't as powerless as she feared. But her relief was swiftly replaced by fury. Marcus had known, even when signing this prenuptial agreement, how to manipulate the situation to his advantage. And there was a cold footnote: the child clause only applied if she gave birth while they remained legally married. If they divorced before the baby was born, the terms could be contested. The child also had to be declared legally his. She felt a swirl of dread. Was he planning on divorcing her before the baby was born to avoid the heavy financial toll? When she shut down the computer and crept out of the office, her heart was beating like a drum. She retreated to the master bedroom, locked the door, and tried to focus. So many swirling emotions consumed her: heartbreak, anger, fear, confusion. Could Marcus be that cold-blooded? Possibly. She had learned more about him in the past few months than she had in the first couple years of marriage. She sat on the edge of the bed, inhaling and exhaling slowly. She placed her hand on her stomach once again, feeling the baby move. A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "I promise I'll take care of you, no matter what it takes." The next day, she forwarded everything she found to Victoria. Her friend's voice was steady when she called, "Stella, we have enough leverage to ensure you and the baby are safe. But we'll have to be smart about this. And we can't wait too long. If he divorces you first, we might end up in a messy litigation. Then we'll make the first move, Stella replied, surprising even herself with the calm in her tone. I won't let him blindside me. Her decision was made. She was done crying over a man who broke her heart. She was going to fight for what was hers and her child's. By the time Stella reached her 9th month of pregnancy, her plan was well underway. She had consulted further with Victoria, arranged her finances, and steeled herself for a confrontation that could happen at any moment. It was a precarious time. Her baby could arrive any day now, and the stress of the looming conflict with Marcus weighed heavily on her. She tried to calm her mind with prenatal yoga and frequent breaks to just breathe and rest, but the tension in her body was ever present. One evening, as she relaxed in a rocking chair in the nursery, painted a soft pastel yellow, her phone buzzed. She picked it up to see Thomas Glendale's caller ID. A sense of dread mingled with resolve as she answered. Mrs. Fitzgerald, Thomas's measured voice said, I followed Mr. Fitzgerald again for the past few days. He's been meeting Miss Hartford at the same condo, but there's something else. It seems he's trying to liquidate some of his domestic assets. Stella's breath caught. You're sure? I am, Thomas said. I've seen him with a real estate broker at one of his properties in Manhattan. This isn't just a random sale. It looked urgent. He was on the phone, seemed very tense. Stella's stomach clenched. Marcus might be trying to move his assets beyond her reach, or perhaps preparing for an eventual blow-up of their marriage. The timeline was dangerously close to her due date. She wondered if he suspected something about her own activities. Maybe he sensed her growing distance, or discovered her rummaging through his documents. After the call ended, Stella spoke with Victoria. The attorney was adamant, we need to move now. If he's moving assets, it means he's preparing for a fight and he wants to come out on top. 2 days later, Stella mustered the courage to confront Marcus. She chose an evening when he actually came home before 10 o'clock. He was sitting in the living room, jacket tossed casually over the arm of the couch, tie loosened, staring out the window at the moonlit gardens. Stella entered quietly, but her posture was upright, a subtle defiance in her gaze. We need to talk, she said. Marcus glanced over, his eyes cool. I'm listening. She took a breath. I know about Natalie Hartford. I know you've been seeing her in Hartford City. I know about the nights you've spent there. She stared at him, her voice trembling slightly, but laced with determination. And I know you're trying to sell off some properties. Marcus's expression froze, and then a slow smirk curved his lips. So you've been snooping around? Yes, Stella snapped, her voice surprisingly forceful. You left me no choice. He stood, taking a step forward. For a moment, Stella felt a flicker of fear, but she refused to back down. And what do you plan to do with this information, Stella? He asked, voice tinged with mockery. She swallowed, summoning her strength. I want a divorce, and I'm going to have full custody of our child. He gave a short, mirthless laugh, as though she'd just told him a silly joke. You think you can just demand that and walk away with my fortune? I'm not after your fortune, Stella said, leveling her gaze. I just want what my child and I are entitled to. I've seen the prenuptial agreement, Marcus. I know the clause about children. I know that once our child is born, I'll have the right to the marital home and substantial child support. His eyes narrowed. Ah, so you have been busy. You always seemed too naive to dig that deeply. I'm not naive, she retorted. I was in love, Marcus, and you used that to your advantage. He stepped closer, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Stella. I have lawyers who can find loopholes. I have connections. You think you'll just waltz out of here with my house and child? Think again. That was the moment Stella realized how ruthless Marcus could be. His eyes bore no remorse, no guilt, just a cold calculation. She swallowed hard, but refused to waver. "I guess we'll let the court decide," she said softly, then turned on her heel and left, leaving him standing there, stunned by her audacity. That night, she barely slept. She kept going over the confrontation in her mind, her heart drumming with anxiety. She had a sinking feeling that Marcus wasn't going to make this easy. She worried about everything: her unborn child, her own emotional state, the possibility that Marcus might retaliate in some unforeseen way. Still, she had to press on. The next morning, she packed some essentials in a suitcase. A few changes of clothes, documents, her prenatal vitamins, and keepsakes like her wedding ring, which she could no longer bear to wear on her finger. She was ready to leave if things escalated, but Marcus was nowhere to be found. He left early, presumably to meet with lawyers or finalize property sales. Over the next week, the house was eerily silent. Marcus was either absent or locked up in his office making calls. He no longer bothered to lie about his whereabouts, nor did he apologize for anything. It was a standoff. One afternoon, while Stella was in the kitchen, she received a text from an unknown number. It read, "Miss S. Fitzgerald, I'm sorry about everything you're going through. You deserve better. I never meant to cause you pain." The signature at the end was Natalie Hartford. Stella stared at the phone, her mind racing. Natalie Hartford was the mistress, the very woman who had upended her marriage. Why on earth would she be texting Stella? Confusion blended with rage. She tapped a response with trembling fingers. "Why would you contact me? And how did you get my number?" A few minutes later, a reply: "Marcus left his phone unlocked. I saw your messages pop up. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Please, meet me. There are things you need to know about Marcus." The audacity left Stella speechless for a moment. The last thing she wanted was to meet the woman who had been sneaking around with her husband. Yet something about the message tugged at her curiosity. If Natalie truly had vital information, it might help Stella protect herself. After an internal debate, Stella agreed to meet. They set the meeting for the next day at a small cafe near the outskirts of Hartford City. Stella arrived first, seating herself in a far corner, partially hidden by a potted palm. She sipped herbal tea to calm her nerves, feeling the baby shift inside her. The cafe door opened, and a tall blonde woman in designer sunglasses entered. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Stella, Natalie Hartford. Natalie removed her sunglasses as she approached, revealing large hazel eyes and a tense expression. She sat across from Stella, glancing around as if wary of being followed. Stella broke the silence first. "Why did you ask to meet me?" Natalie's voice was low, hesitant. "First, let me say, I'm sorry. I had no idea you were pregnant until I saw it in the news coverage of your recent charity gala. Marcus never told me. He said you two were basically separated, that your marriage was a formality." She paused, her eyes clouded with regret. "I ended things with him a month ago, but he kept coming around. I realized he was lying to me, too." Stella's anger flared, but the sincerity in Natalie's eyes made her hold her tongue. The blonde woman continued, "Marcus isn't just cheating on you with me. There have been others. I have texts, photos. I was never the only one. He lured me in with gifts, promises, and I was stupid enough to believe him." She slipped her phone out of her purse. "I can show you. It might help your case." Stella's heart pounded. "Why would you do that?" Natalie exhaled shakily. "Because you deserve better, and he deceived both of us. I found out he's planning to move a lot of money offshore. He talked about heading to the Cayman Islands and never coming back, leaving you with nothing. He bragged he could slip away, that no court would have jurisdiction. He said some awful things about you and your baby." Stella felt a wave of nausea. This was worse than she had imagined. Marcus was planning to vanish, leaving her destitute, even though she was carrying his child. Her eyes burned with tears, but she blinked them back. She needed to be strong. Natalie handed over her phone. Stella scrolled through messages, photos, timestamps of Marcus with other women, of him discussing money transfers and mocking Stella's cluelessness. With each new revelation, Stella's outrage grew. She realized Marcus had never loved her, or maybe, if he had, that love had died long ago. This was a man who was cold, calculating, and capable of deserting his unborn child for the sake of his own selfish desires. When Stella left the cafe that day, she had a renewed sense of purpose. Natalie forwarded all the evidence to Stella's private email, and Stella promised to keep Natalie's involvement discreet if it ever came to court. In one of the most ironic twists, the mistress was now an ally, helping Stella gather enough ammunition to take Marcus down. Stella drove home, her thoughts swirling, her belly tight with tension. If Marcus was truly planning to vanish, she had to act fast. Her baby's due date was mere weeks away, and stress was the last thing she needed. But she couldn't let him slip away. Even if it meant igniting a war, she was ready to fight. Stella filed for divorce first thing in the morning. With Victoria's help, she assembled the damning evidence, Thomas Glendale's reports, Natalie Hartford's messages, and even statements from household staff who had witnessed Marcus's suspicious activities. The documents painted a chilling picture of a man who refused to honor his marriage vows and planned to flee his responsibilities entirely. Marcus was served the papers at his office in downtown Hartford. According to Victoria, he erupted in fury, terrifying the receptionist and slamming his fist against his desk. Stella prepared herself for the storm that would undoubtedly follow. He arrived home later that evening, finding Stella in the living room, her suitcase half-packed by her side. He tossed the divorce papers at her feet, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell is this?" he roared, gesturing wildly. "You think you can just take everything from me?" Stella stood calmly, though her knees felt weak. "You did this to yourself, Marcus. You cheated and planned to run away. I have proof." "Proof?" His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Is that why you've been acting so sly lately? Who helped you?" Stella refused to answer, not wanting to drag Natalie or the investigator into the line of fire. Instead, she said, "I want you out. The house is in both our names, and once the baby is born, I have every right to stay here." He let out a derisive snort. "We'll see what the courts have to say about that. Don't forget our prenup. It doesn't favor you." She stared him down. "Except the child clause. You added it yourself, remember? You were so confident that you'd never be in this position. Well, guess what? It's happening." "We're done, Marcus." His face flickered with fear, just for a second, as he realized that she had done her homework. Then a sneer replaced it. "Fine, but don't think I'll go down without a fight." Without another word, he stormed out the door. The sound of his expensive sports car peeling out of the driveway echoed through the property. Stella's heart pounded, but she felt a measure of triumph. She sank onto the couch, hand over her pregnant belly, whispering to her unborn child that everything would be okay. For the next week, Marcus fought the divorce filing aggressively. His team of high-powered lawyers bombarded Stella and Victoria with motions and challenges, claiming that Stella was unstable, that she was trying to trap him with a child that might not even be his, and any number of other outlandish accusations. Victoria navigated each blow calmly, gathering medical records, paternity tests, which all confirmed Marcus's fatherhood, and sworn statements. She was a force in the courtroom, not letting the opposing counsel get away with slander. Despite Marcus's attempts, the judge refused to dismiss Stella's petition. The prenuptial agreement was valid, and the child clause was unambiguous. If the baby was indeed Marcus's, Stella had a strong claim to the marital home and child support. Marcus seethed in court, glaring at Stella with contempt. It was a tense period for Stella, but she found an unlikely support system in Rachel Addison, who visited her often, bringing homemade meals and emotional encouragement. Rachel never pressed for details about how Stella had discovered the affair or the extent of Marcus's betrayal. She simply offered a listening ear and a comforting presence, which Stella needed more than ever. Thomas Glendale also continued to feed Stella updates. He had sources tracking Marcus's financial movements, ensuring that if he tried to squirrel money offshore, they had documentation to present in court. Each passing day seemed to intensify Marcus's desperation. Stella worried that he might do something drastic. Sure enough, he did. One night, around 11 o'clock, Stella was awakened by the sound of shouting. She hurried to the window and saw Marcus standing in the driveway, flanked by two men in dark suits, likely private security. He was yelling at the house staff, demanding entry. Stella's heart pounded with both fear and anger. She grabbed her phone to call Victoria, but decided to first confront him herself, as the house staff looked terrified. She descended the grand staircase, her nightgown floating around her ankles, her pregnant belly now unmistakably pronounced. She opened the front door and glared at Marcus. "What do you want?" she demanded. He gave a cold laugh. "It's my house, remember? I can come and go as I please." Stella crossed her arms. "You moved out weeks ago. You can't just barge in at this hour." A smug grin curled his lips. "I'm here to collect some personal items. My security detail is with me to make sure no one tries any funny business." He aimed his gaze at the staff, who remained on the lawn, unsure of how to proceed. "Fine," Stella said. "Get your things and leave." Marcus marched inside, the guards following close behind. Stella stayed in the foyer, her arms folded, her body tense. She thought it would be a quick in-and-out scenario, but Marcus lingered, rummaging loudly in various rooms. After nearly an hour, she confronted him. "Are you done?" she asked, standing in the doorway of his home office. His attempt to rummage through documents might have been a ploy to find and destroy any incriminating evidence. Stella had collected. He turned to face her. "Why are you rushing me? Afraid I'll find something you don't want me to see?" Her patience frayed. "There's nothing here for you. I've sent everything to my lawyer. You won't find a shred of evidence to destroy." She realized too late she had revealed that all documents were safe, an unintentional challenge. Marcus's face twisted with rage, and for a moment she thought he might lash out at her physically. Instead, he snatched a stack of manila folders from a drawer. "This is my property," he hissed, though Stella had no idea what was in those folders. Then he pushed past her, storming out of the office and down the hall. The security men shuffled behind him. Moments later, the heavy front door slammed, and Stella was left trembling in the aftermath. That night, she barely slept. She kept imagining the worst-case scenarios, Marcus making good on his threat to flee the country or trying to force her to go somewhere against her will. She felt the baby kicking restlessly, as though mirroring her anxiety. She wanted to believe she was strong, but she was also very close to giving birth. The last thing she needed was a confrontation that endangered her or her child. The next morning, she spoke with Victoria. "I'm worried he might try to run," Stella confessed, her voice cracking with emotion. "What if he leaves the country?" Victoria's tone was soothing but firm. "We filed motions to freeze certain assets and will petition the court for a restraining order if he threatens you again. But you need to stay on your guard. Maybe consider moving somewhere safe until you have the baby." Stella thought of leaving her beloved home, but she also understood the danger. If Marcus was truly on the edge, there was no telling what he might do. After a few hours of pondering, she decided to temporarily stay with Rachel Addison. She took only her essentials, leaving behind most of her possessions. She told the house staff to contact her immediately if Marcus returned, and she alerted Thomas Glendale to keep an extra vigilant eye. Though she felt a pang leaving the mansion she had once dreamed of filling with laughter and memories, she reassured herself it was for her safety and the baby's. She couldn't risk a volatile confrontation in the final weeks of her pregnancy. At Rachel's place, a modest townhouse in a nearby suburb, Stella found a surprising sense of relief. She and Rachel cooked together, watched light-hearted movies, and talked late into the night about dreams for the future. Stella realized how stifling the mansion had become, heavy with tension and unfulfilled promises. Perhaps stepping away, even temporarily, was the best thing she could have done. Meanwhile, Marcus's legal team continued to escalate their tactics, but Victoria deftly countered each move. The hearing for preliminary spousal and child support was scheduled for the following week. Stella could only wait, her heart pounding every time her phone buzzed. The day Stella went into labor was a day she would never forget. She had planned a calm birth environment, complete with soothing music and a carefully chosen hospital suite. But her baby had other ideas, arriving 2 weeks before the due date, on a stormy afternoon when the sky was rumbling with thunder. Stella was at Rachel's townhouse, sitting on the couch, chatting about the upcoming hearing. She felt a sudden, sharp pain in her lower abdomen, followed by a gush of water. Alarmed, Rachel drove her to the hospital, navigating rain-slicked roads with knuckles white on the steering wheel. Stella breathed through contractions, tears mingling with sweat, as the pain intensified. At the hospital, she was rushed into a private room. The obstetrician, Dr. Alexandra Pierce, was a reassuring presence, guiding Stella through the labor. Hours passed in a haze of pain and exertion. Rachel held her hand, whispering encouragement, reminding her to breathe. Finally, at 8 in the evening, Stella's son came into the world. The moment she heard his first cry, a wave of relief and love washed over her, so powerful it stole her breath. Dr. Pierce placed the tiny, wriggling newborn on Stella's chest, and Stella sobbed with joy, pressing kisses to his forehead. His little hands grasped at her hospital gown, and she felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. Rachel smiled through tears, snapping photos for Stella to cherish later. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a mum now." Marcus was conspicuously absent. He hadn't come to the hospital, hadn't even reached out. Whether he knew she was in labor or not was unclear. Stella couldn't help feeling a pang that the father of her child wasn't there to witness such a miracle. But she also felt an odd sense of relief. Perhaps it was better this way than inviting his hostility into a vulnerable moment. She named the baby Alexander James Fitzgerald. The middle name was a nod to her father, James, who had passed away years earlier. Stella held Alexander close, studying his tiny features, his button nose, his dark hair, the shape of his mouth that oddly reminded her of Marcus. It was bittersweet, knowing her child carried traits from a man who had broken her heart. Once Stella was settled, Rachel went out to buy some celebratory treats and handle phone calls. Stella cradled Alexander, humming a lullaby, her eyes heavy but her heart full. She had never felt such an overwhelming sense of love and purpose. In this fragile, perfect life, she found a reason to persevere, to fight for a future free from Marcus's manipulation. 2 days later, Stella was discharged. She carefully strapped Alexander into a car seat, with Rachel's help, and they drove back to the townhouse. Motherhood was an immediate shift for Stella. Her days became a cycle of feeding, changing diapers, trying to snatch a few moments of sleep, and gazing into her baby's eyes, marveling at his every movement. Then came a shock. On the 4th day after Alexander's birth, Stella received a summons delivered to Rachel's address. Marcus had filed a motion challenging paternity and seeking an emergency hearing to dispute Stella's claim for child support. Outrage bubbled in Stella's chest as she read the legal documents. Despite the paternity test results Stella already had, Marcus was insisting on a court-ordered test, claiming the child might not be his. It was a vicious move, clearly designed to intimidate her. She called Victoria, who reassured her, "Don't worry, we have the medical records, including a paternity test." The judge isn't going to hand the baby over to him or deny you support on a whim. He's just stalling. Yet the hearing date was set for the following week. Stella was still sore from childbirth, physically and emotionally drained, but she had to prepare to show up in court. Rachel offered to watch Alexander if needed, or even come along for support. Stella accepted the offer gratefully. When the day of the hearing arrived, Stella, dressed in a conservative blouse and skirt, moving gingerly due to lingering soreness. She left Alexander with a trusted babysitter recommended by Rachel, not wanting to subject him to the courthouse's stress. Accompanied by Victoria, she walked into the family courthouse with her head held high. Marcus was there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his expression cold as marble. His lawyer wasted no time launching into arguments that questioned Stella's fidelity, painting her as someone who might have had multiple partners. Victoria fired back with proof of the private investigator's timelines, Stella's medical records, and the previous paternity test. Throughout the hearing, Stella could feel Marcus's glare burning into her. She avoided his gaze, focusing on her baby's future. At one point, the judge asked Marcus directly, "Mr. Fitzgerald, you are aware that your wife's prenatal records show consistent medical testing from the earliest weeks of her pregnancy, indicating you as the father?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I want a new test done. I don't trust any test she obtained on her own." The judge sighed, clearly unimpressed with Marcus's belligerence. "Very well. A court-ordered test can be administered, but if the results confirm your paternity, Mr. Fitzgerald, we will move forward with child support proceedings without further delay." Stella expected Marcus to protest, but he smirked. Perhaps he believed a delay could buy him time to move assets or undermine Stella's claims. Little did he know that Thomas Glendale and Victoria had already put protective measures in place. The hearing ended with an order for a new paternity test. Though it felt like a setback, Victoria whispered confidently to Stella, "Don't worry, it'll confirm what we already know." That evening, as Stella rocked Alexander to sleep, her phone chimed with an email. It was from Thomas Glendale. He had discovered that Marcus was funneling money into an account in the Cayman Islands and had booked a flight for the end of the month. A wave of panic surged through Stella. He was planning to run again, and this time perhaps for good. Victoria acted swiftly, filing an injunction to freeze Marcus's finances pending the paternity test results. She also requested an emergency order to prevent him from leaving the state until the case was resolved. The judge granted a partial freeze on certain accounts, but the order to prevent Marcus from traveling outside the country was still pending. Time was running out. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Between caring for Alexander, who woke Stella up every 2 hours at night, and scrambling to keep up with legal motions, Stella felt like she was living in a constant state of exhaustion. Yet she found a reservoir of strength she never knew she had. Whenever she looked into Alexander's tiny face, she reminded herself that every battle was for him. Finally, the results of the court-ordered paternity test came in, 99.99% probability that Marcus Fitzgerald was the father. The court scheduled a final hearing on child support and spousal maintenance. Knowing Marcus, Stella expected one last desperate move. On the morning of the final hearing, Stella woke early. She wore a subdued navy blue dress, pinned her hair back, and held Alexander for a long moment, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Rachel would watch him again during the proceedings, but Stella still felt a pang leaving him. This was the day she would confront Marcus in court with all the evidence. This was the day her fate and Alexander's would be decided. At the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Marcus's high-powered attorney was present, shuffling papers and frowning at notes. Marcus himself looked haggard, dark circles rimmed his eyes. Stella wondered if the freeze on his assets and the looming threat of losing a fortune had kept him up at night. She felt a faint, grim satisfaction at seeing him experience even a fraction of her stress. The judge, a middle-aged woman with an air of calm authority, called the courtroom to order. Victoria began by outlining Stella's claims. Marcus had been unfaithful, neglected his pregnant wife, attempted to transfer assets illegally, and planned to flee the country, all while Stella was left to give birth alone. She presented the private investigator's records, Natalie Hartford's statements, and financial traces from Thomas Glendale. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit the evidence, claiming Stella had entrapped him, that the affair was a mere rumor, that financial maneuvers were normal business practices. But the judge seemed unimpressed. When Victoria presented the paternity test results and the trust clause from the prenuptial agreement, it became glaringly obvious that Marcus was indeed on the losing side. The agreement was clear. Should a child be born within the marriage, Stella was entitled to significant provisions, including the marital home and child support proportionate to Marcus's income. Marcus was then given a chance to speak. He stood, adjusting his tie, and delivered a hollow statement. "I love my son," he said stiffly. "I want to be part of his life. But Stella has been manipulative, refusing me contact, and—" Victoria jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Fitzgerald made no attempts to be present at the birth or to reach out after. We have phone records showing no calls or messages to Stella's phone." The judge raised an eyebrow at Marcus. "Is that true, Mr. Fitzgerald? You haven't called or messaged your wife about your newborn child?" Marcus sputtered. "She blocked me." Victoria swiftly produced the phone records. "No. These show no outgoing attempts to call or text Miss Fitzgerald after the child's birth, which he was aware of. His lawyer tried to pivot, but the damage was done. Marcus's credibility was in tatters. The judge moved on to the matter of the house. After reviewing the prenuptial agreement and hearing testimonies, she decided that Stella and the child were entitled to remain in the marital residence for stability, at least until the final arrangement was hammered out. Furthermore, she granted Stella primary custody, with a structured visitation schedule for Marcus contingent upon his financial support and proof of a stable environment. Finally, the judge addressed the question of child support and spousal maintenance. Marcus was ordered to pay a considerable sum, reflective of his net worth, which the court had assessed from his tax returns and financial statements. The final decree was a resounding victory for Stella. She felt tears well in her eyes, tears of relief and vindication. Marcus stood there, silent, his fists clenched at his sides. After the judge declared the session adjourned, he glared at Stella, his lips pressed thin. She braced herself, half expecting him to lash out. Instead, he turned on his heel and stalked out, his lawyer trailing after him. Victoria gave Stella a small, triumphant smile. "We did it," she whispered, patting Stella's arm. Stella nodded, barely able to speak. The weight of months of stress lifted, replaced by the realization that she could now start anew, free from the shadows of betrayal. She hurried outside, her heart pounding, eager to return to Alexander, to hold him close and whisper that they were going to be all right. A few days later, Stella moved back into the mansion with the baby and a carefully chosen staff. She hired new security, ensuring that if Marcus tried anything untoward, they could intervene. She also placed new locks on the doors, though Marcus technically still had visitation rights. She and Victoria organized a schedule. Marcus would see Alexander in a supervised setting, given his recent volatility. Surprisingly, Marcus did not contest these arrangements further. Perhaps he was too drained, or maybe he realized he could not win against the ironclad legal rulings. The man who once lorded over the estate as if it were his kingdom now slunk around the periphery. occasionally stopping by to see Alexander under watchful eyes. The visits were tense, but Stella allowed them. She recognized that Alexander might someday want to know his father. She refused to let her own anger deprive her son of that choice, provided Marcus remained civil. In the weeks that followed, Stella began the process of rebuilding her life. She redecorated rooms in the mansion, removing old memories and transforming spaces into bright, cozy areas suitable for a newborn. She also started exploring philanthropic endeavors she once put on hold. Her friend Rachel Addison offered to partner with her on a charity foundation supporting single mothers in need. Inspired by her own struggles, Stella decided it was the perfect way to channel her experience into helping others. And so, the house that once seemed like a cold, unwelcoming fortress turned into a safe haven for Stella and her child. It was no longer defined by Marcus's wealth or influence, but by Stella's determination to create a nurturing environment. She hosted small gatherings for new mothers, turning the once grandiose sitting room into a place of warmth and support. Marcus's presence faded into the background. He occasionally paid visits, but the staff kept a watchful eye. He seemed subdued, almost ghost-like, as though he couldn't fathom how his life had spun so far out of control. Whenever Stella saw him, she felt a mixture of pity and lingering anger. In time, perhaps she might fully forgive him, or at least find closure. For now, her priority was Alexander and building a stable future. One evening, months later, Stella stood in the nursery, watching Alexander sleep in his crib. A soft nightlight glowed, illuminating his tiny, peaceful face. She recalled every twist and turn of the past year, her heartbreak, her fear, her unwavering fight. She had come out on the other side, holding her child in a life she had reclaimed as her own. She brushed a kiss across his forehead, whispering, "We did it, baby. We're safe, and this house, it's ours now." Outside, the Connecticut moon shone over the sprawling lawns. No longer a scene of secrets and lies, it was a testament to Stella's resilience. She had discovered the bitter sting of betrayal, but also the fierce power of a mother's love. And in the end, that was enough to conquer any storm Marcus could throw her way. The saga of Stella Fitzgerald proves that even in life's darkest moments, a spark of courage can transform heartbreak into hope. From the gilded mansion where she discovered the unthinkable betrayal, to the courtroom where she fought for justice, and finally to the nursery where she cradled her newborn son, Stella showed that love, especially a mother's love, will always find a way. Her journey wasn't easy. It was filled with heartache, betrayal, and sleepless nights of uncertainty. Yet in reclaiming her home and ensuring a secure future for her child, Stella emerged stronger than ever. The house that once felt like a prison is now a sanctuary of love and possibility. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring, true-to-life tales to light. Join our community and let Stella's story be a reminder that resilience and hope can triumph, no matter the odds.